Welcome to this iChannel iLearning video on the introduction of the Workflow Rollover tool. Each year, many firms will create a workflow project to manage their clients' activities and tasks throughout the business year. It's not uncommon these workflow projects will be the same workflows used from year to year. Firms now can take advantage of a new feature, the Workflow Rollover tool in iChannel, which allows firms to quickly and easily roll over existing workflow projects from year to year, greatly reducing the need to create new workflows on their clients each year. Now, this new tool, which is managed only by your system administrator, is quickly accessed by selecting the workflows from the main menu banner. It is also worth noting that prior to version 3 of iChannel, workflows were referred to as projects. Let's take a moment to look at the new Workflow Rollover tool in greater detail. To begin, click on the Workflows from the main menu banner located at the top of the screen. From this screen, next click on the Workflow Rollover button. The Workflow Rollover screen will appear. The Workflow Rollover screen contains the Search Functionality section at the top of the page, which provides many search criteria options, of which type and year are required. By populating these fields, the user constrains the search to only those year-end workflows that should be rolled over to new workflows for the current year. When you're ready to search for a workflow, remember that the type year, which is a required field, must be filled out. In this scenario, I'll go ahead and select the tax as the type, and the current year is already defaulted for me. So I'm going to leave that in for this exercise. Now, for this exercise, I'm only going to add these two entries, and then I'm going to go ahead and click the search. Now, remember, all of the additional search fields that are on the screen are optional, and you can add as much or as little additional search criteria as you would like as you search. But again, I'm going to search just on the type and on the year. Any matching workflows that are based off the type and the year will appear in the return area of the screen. As you can see, there are 4 current workflows that are eligible for a rollover into the year, in this case, which will be 2021. When you're ready to create a new workflow rollover, you've completed your search and you have found your return workflows. You'll select a workflow or workflows to roll over. Now, in this exercise, I'm only going to roll over one of the existing workflows. I'm going to roll over the Persod entity tax year 2020 tax return of 1099. Now, that was the tax return that I've already set up all of the tasks, all of the activities within that workflow. And that information that's in that workflow, I've decided is the same information I would use in the next year, in this case 2021. So I'm just going to roll this one over. So I'm going to go ahead and just deselect the other workflows that I do not want to roll over at this time. And I'm only going to leave selected that one workflow. Now, in the lower section of the screen, you'll see that there's a series of tabs, and we're going to go through those tabs and some of the required information needed to create the workflow. So let's start off first with the main tab. Now, the main tab contains the list of fields to be defined or edited in order to create the rollover of the selected workflow or workflows. The option selected for each parameter defines how that parameter will be set in the new workflows created. So let's look at this in more detail. So now the workflow name, now if you remember the workflow name in this scenario that I'm doing in this iLearning video is the tax return 1099. Now you have two options here. You can just leave the name and copy the name from last year into the new year of 2021. Another option you have is to use the existing name, but you can also add the year to the beginning of that name if that is a way for you to quickly identify and locate in a search that new workflow. So as the administrator who's creating the workflow, you have two options when it comes to renaming the new workflow in the next year is just use the existing name, which is the default, or go ahead and select that you'd like to go ahead and stamp the year at the beginning, which would be 2021 plus the name. tax return 1099. Once you make that selection, and I'm going to go ahead and just this exercise, I'm going to select the year plus one in the name. Now, each field or each drop down that you see on the main tab is required. Some of the fields do already come pre-populated, and as you drop into those drop downs, you can see here that you can just select different parameters as it would apply for your organization on how you're going to roll over the tools. Now you can leave all the defaults, which you see basically say copy from the previous year as is. It's going to use all of the previous information, just roll that over into the new year. Do remember that all the fields are required. So in this one field, if I'm rolling over this new rollover into the next year, you can go ahead and set the status. So in this case, if I'm rolling it over, I might say it's not started yet. I'm just going to go ahead and get that in place. So I'll be ready to work on this new tax return 1099 for the Prasad entity in this scenario. Now, once you've finished working on this tab and filled in all of the necessary information that you need, you would just move over to the Detail tab. Now, it's important to remember to select the template associated with this new tax return. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the template tax return in this scenario. Once you've completed updating all of the drop-down fields as needed on the main tab, move over to the Details tab. Now, the Details tab, as you can see here, has, in this case, two options. Now, there may be additional options depending on the workflow that you're using, but in this case here, there were just two available detailed options on this workflow, and they were around, in this case, the deliverables. Now, the same logic applies as we did on the main tab, is that you do have drop downs. They do come pre-populated with information, and each user can drop into these drop downs and make different selections based on the entries that are located here. If there are no changes needed to be made on the Detail tab, then the user can simply just go ahead and move over to the Discussions tab. Now, as you can see here on the Discussions tab, there are a series of entries that are located here. Again, you would go through and you would make all of the necessary changes as needed as it would apply to your workflow. Each organization would manage these entries a little bit differently, but again, they're all required. Each of these fields, once you've completed the Discussions tab, you would move over to the Task tab. As you can see here is a series of questions as it relates to the task in reference to this workload. Some of the fields, again, are already pre-populated. You could come in and, again, make those business decisions about your workflow that you're going to roll over. If any of the fields are not pre-populated yet, that just means it needs a selection from the administrator who's rolling over this tool. I'm going to go ahead and, in this case here, say that these tasks are not started yet. So I'm going to go ahead and fill all of those entries in. If I do have and have created any additional UDF fields as it relates to my organization and the use of workflows, I would go through here and check off any of those that are needed. Now, it's worth noting the UDF fields are not required. You would check those off as they would apply to your organization and the workflow that you're using. Next, I'm going to move over to the Saved Settings tab. Now, this function allows the users, or in this case the administrator, to save the selected settings for the fields in all the tabs as saved settings, and this will load those settings for all of the parameters when required for workflow rollovers. This allows for quick loading of all the parameters for the rollovers that you have done repeatedly. Now I'm going to go ahead and just save all these parameters as save as new. Now, it's going to ask that you enter a new name for these settings. So in this case, I might say that this is the saved settings for any tax return 1099. Again, you would come up with your own organizational or firm naming convention. I'm going to go ahead and just click on the Save button, save those settings. As you can see at the top, it's just going to go ahead and show me that I have saved those settings. I'll click the OK button. And as you can see here in my drop down, that is the save settings that I have. So I could go in, and when I'm ready and I want to do another rollover, I could come in, go to my save settings, select one of my previously saved settings. I could go ahead then and just load those settings, which would go back and remember all of the settings that I have saved that would preload all of these fields for me. So it would save me time and effort as the administrator, not having to go back through each time I do a rollover and set up these parameters. So you can go ahead and take advantage of creating any of your save parameters in advance. And when you're ready to use it, just come in here before you set any of these tabs, select that save setting, and then hit load. When you're ready to create your rollover, just click on the Create Rollovers button. And this will create the new workflow based on all of the selected workflows selections that you made on the main, the detail, the discussions, the task, the optional UDF fields where you made those selections. When the workflow process is completed after you've selected the Create Workflows rollover, you'll get a pop-up window that will give you confirmation that you've had one workflow success. That was the workflow of the 1099. There were 0 failures. Now, for any reason the workflow was not able to successfully create the rollover, you would see that in the workflows failure screen. When you're ready, just go ahead and click on the close button here and close that window out. Now, as you can see here, if you go back and I was to click on the search button, remember there was previously 4 rollovers that matched my search criteria, but I've gone ahead and rolled over one of those, so it's no longer going to be in my field. So I've got 3 more that I could work through. After the search, you can see there's only 3 remaining workflows that are left that are eligible for a rollover. Now, that previous workflow that I just worked on is no longer on this screen because it's already been rolled over into the next year of 2021. So now let's take an opportunity and go and locate that new rollover. Now, let's go back and search for that new rollover workflow that we just created. I'm going to click on the workflows from the main menu on the banner. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pre-populate some of the fields. Now, one of the things I do know that when I created the workflow, I did create it on a particular entity, in this case, the Prasad entity. I do know that it was a type of tax. I did roll it over in the year of 2021, and I do know that it is a not started task. Now, remember, all of those things I set up when I did the previous activity of rolling over the previous workflow into the year 2021. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on the search button. And as you can see here, there's that new naming convention 2021 that was added. That's what I selected on the main tab when I created the workflow rollover. There's the tax return 1099, all of the associated activities and tasks, if they would have been there. In this case, they would have located on this screen. Hope you enjoyed this iLearning video on the introduction of the workflow rollover tool.